Okay, welcome everybody. There might be a few more trickling in as we get started here, and that is okay. A lot of times it's hard to get going in the afternoon. I get it, going from one thing to the next. So I'm Sadie Everett, and I am the director of the Regional Autism Advisory Council, or RAAC. And RAAC now lives, if you haven't heard my spiel before, but RAAC now lives at the University of Cincinnati in our center, the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Education Center, or the IDD Education Center. And we are super happy and proud to have adopted or acquired RAAC. And I have the honor of being the director of this incredible program, bringing stakeholders in the community together to learn about new things like we're doing today, and also to collaborate and partner as we solve problems in the community and create a more inclusive and improve outcomes in our community. So I will stop talking now and introduce Dr. Rebecca Shaffer, and she has an amazing training for us today on dysregulation. And we're going to also hear about her intervention that you created, right? The regulating together. And I'm very excited to hear about what that entails. And I'm looking forward to us all being able to take away a little something to implement in our work. So I'm going to stop talking now and turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Sadie. I'd love to hear just a little bit about our audience. So if you guys could unmute and tell me what age group you work with, or you can just raise your hand in the reaction. So how many people do we have that are working with like really young kids? So like preschool age. You can also turn your video on and raise your hand if that's easier. Okay, how about school age kids? So kindergarten through like 6th, 7th grade. Okay, you had a couple. And how about adolescents, teenagers? Okay, and then how about adults? Okay, all right. That is just helpful for me as I give examples and think through the information that I'm presenting. So thank you for bearing with me. Like Sadie said, my name is Rebecca Shaffer. I'm a clinical psychologist at Cincinnati Children's. I've been here for 11 and a half years, and we created a program called Regulating Together about 9.5 years ago. And so I'm going to present a little bit of our research findings, a little bit of the background, and then also some strategies that hopefully are helpful to you as a clinician or someone who works with individuals with autism in order to manage emotion dysregulation. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And sorry, I thought I had this open, but apparently I don't. Okay. Are you able to see it?
I do not see it.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, shoot. I didn't actually click share. Okay. All right. How about now?
Yep, we see it.
Great. Okay. All right. So I just want to start off with just like a couple of conflicts of interest and research support. So I do receive research funding from the Department of Defense and the National Institute of Health. And then I am an author of the Regulating Together curriculum, and I receive compensation for trainings. And I like to start off with thank yous instead of ending with them, just so that I can kind of set the stage for who's done this work with me. The co-authors of Regulating Together are Dr. Lauren Schmidt and Jenna Ruberg, one of our social workers here at Children's. And then my trainees, past and present, have made a huge impact on the intervention over the years. and our broader neurobehavioral team, although they don't all work on regulating together, they all work with individuals with neurodevelopmental conditions and have, directly worked with me for many years. And then just a huge thank you to all the families who have participated in the program. This should be actually 9 years now. I need to update that slide. But their commitment and feedback have really fueled the program and the research over the years. So we're going to start with a little bit of background and just some definitions and information. So emotion regulation is a term that is getting thrown around a lot recently, and I think it's important for us to start with a common definition. So it's the ability to control the intensity of an emotion as well as adjusting how emotions are expressed. So the goal with emotion regulation would be to express it in an appropriate way for the situation. Regulation might happen before or after a triggering event, and it can be purposeful or it can happen completely unconsciously. It usually includes the use of coping skills in some way, and at its core, it really means staying calm in the midst of stress that's happening around you. On the flip side of that, emotion dysregulation isn't just the opposite of emotion regulation. It's really this idea of being reactive and easily triggered, having lots of tantrums or outbursts, and then really difficulty calming down once upset. So I'm sure you can all think of some children that get upset very easily, but they also calm down very easily. And that doesn't lead to a ton of dysregulation. Whereas if we have kids who get upset very easily and they have a hard time calming down once upset, that can be much trickier. And many times the emotions are too big or too small for the situation. So when we think about emotion dysregulation in the context of autism, there are like some unique pieces of autism that really cause emotion dysregulation to be a core part of the disorder, even though it's not listed as a core part. There's many ASD predispositions that often lead to emotion dysregulation. So things like difficulties with flexibility, inhibition, and frustration tolerance, difficulty reading emotions in yourself as well as others, sensory challenges, intolerance of change, poor problem solving, limited coping skills, executive functioning challenges, and then just the biological risk that we know is inherently part of autism. So things like neural circuitry in the brain, physiological arousal differences, as well as genetics. And all of these predispositions lead to emotion dysregulation, and we're going to define that as emotional reactivity, irritability or being on edge, dysphoria or the lack of positive emotions or positive emotions during experiences that are enjoyable, mood swings, and difficulty calming down. And what the research has shown us over the past 5 to 8 years is that emotion dysregulation in the context of autism leads to really significant negative outcomes. So primarily we see increased rates of psychiatric symptoms. So kids who are dysregulated are more likely to get a co-occurring depression or anxiety diagnosis. They have increased rates of suicidality, high rates of family stress because the families are struggling to manage the dysregulation, increased use of intensive crisis services. So they're more likely to have calls to the police or to mental health emergency services. They're also more likely to have an inpatient hospitalization if they have dysregulation. And oftentimes those inpatient hospitalizations are due to suicidality or aggression, self-injury, or destructive behaviors. We know that social deficits are a core part of autism, but they're even worse for these kids who have autism and they're emotionally dysregulated. Some of that is that they miss out on really positive social experiences because they're dysregulated in the moment. And then they also struggle in school because they're having these episodes, and that leads to difficulties staying in the classroom and learning. And then just high rates of internalizing and externalizing symptoms. So if we think of treatment options for emotion dysregulation within autism, Most providers are really thinking about a transdiagnostic approach. So this is emerging in the literature, and emotion regulation is viewed as an underlying mechanism of many diagnoses. So there's quite a bit of research that shows within borderline personality disorder and eating disorders and ADHD and depression and anxiety, emotion dysregulation, the inability to regulate your emotions is often this underlying mechanism that's present across many psychiatric diagnoses. And within ASD, we do see that. So, we may have a group of kids that all have emotion dysregulation and all have autism, but we have a range of co-occurring diagnoses in that group. So some kids may have anxiety, some may have depression, and some may just be irritable and cranky. So psychological interventions are one of the main treatment strategies for emotion dysregulation. Emotion regulation skills are often taught as a small component of a larger program. So if we think about DBT, emotion regulation is a key piece of that. Many social skills interventions are going to teach just a little bit of emotion regulation so that you can regulate in a social scenario. But interventions for youth with emotion dysregulation specifically are often not adapted for kids with intellectual disability or with communication challenges. And medication is often a needed treatment component. And it really is like a combined approach of medication plus therapy intervention. So if we look at available treatment for emotion dysregulation and autism specifically, there are a handful of interventions that have been created, and they're very different from each other. So I'm going to go through each of them individually and not spend a ton of time on them, but just give you kind of a heads up of what they are. So the first one is EASE. This study, this intervention is for adolescents. It's an individual therapy model, and it focuses primarily on mindfulness. It was developed at the University of Pittsburgh and in collaboration with the University of Alabama. They had a very large treatment trial that is hopefully getting ready to be published soon and offering trainings and things like that. So this is one of the only interventions available for teens that is specifically for emotion dysregulation and autism. STAMP is on the other end of that age spectrum. This is really for preschool age children, up through age 7, I believe, 7 or 8. And it's a group intervention that's focused on teaching skills, and then there's a co-occurring caregiver component. And it has had a couple of research trials. You can buy this manual on Amazon. Operation Regulation is part of a larger intervention called Secret Agent Society. It's a computer game and it has a group component. And it is focused on emotion regulation for 8 to 12-year-olds, but it is individual and there's not a caregiver component. And then that brings us to Regulating Together, which I'm going to talk a lot about with you today. It is for ages 8 through 18 and has a group, it's a group intervention, it's an intensive time intervention and has a caregiver component. And then just generally, we know that CBT, DBT, and mindfulness are all very helpful. And those are the core components that exist in all of these interventions. So we're going to talk about RT today. So about 9 years ago at Cincinnati Children's, there was this dramatic treatment need. So there was a critical gap in services. There were no interventions for emotion regulation. We knew that there was a risk of hospitalization if ER was not addressed. We also had an access problem. So there was a really long wait list for outpatient therapy services. And we were thinking a lot about treatment setting because we would see improvement in individual therapy, but that didn't always translate to more social scenarios where a lot of dysregulation was occurring. So we went from this critical gap to develop Regulating Together. So we ran it clinically at Cincinnati Children's. With developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and autism, intensive outpatient services. We did a chart review paper in 2019 that was published and really looked at some initial outcomes and feedback from families. And then we received a grant from the hospital, an internal grant award called Place Outcomes. And that was specifically focused on autism at that point. It was a within subjects trial, which I'll share a little bit about in a little bit. And we had an article published for that one in 2023 with our initial pilot outcomes. And it included quite a bit of stakeholder feedback about the experience in the study. And then finally, we're at this point where we have 2 funded randomized controlled trials. So this first one is our Department of Defense grant, where kids receive Regulating Together. They receive AIMS, which is a a school success program focused on executive functioning. And then the second one is the NIH funded study, where we have Regulating Together versus Regulating Together plus therapy dogs, which is a very fun study. So those are both in progress right now. So what is RT? It's a group treatment, which really addresses that social and educational environment challenge to treatment. It also increases access. So we can treat 6 to 8 children in one group instead of just one child in that same time period. It's an intensive model, so it meets for 90 minutes twice a week for 5 weeks. So 10 sessions, but they are compressed into a twice a week schedule. And there's a caregiver group. So caregivers receive direct instruction in the material, and they really get this experience of being supported and normalizing their experiences with other caregivers who are present, and having the same challenges with their child at home. We also really believe that the caregiver group component increases durability post-treatment. So we believe that the outcomes that we see long-term are really due to those caregivers understanding the curriculum and keeping it going over time. So this is an overview of the child curriculum. So this is for 8 to 12-year-olds. And it progresses, it all builds upon itself. So it goes from emotions to relaxation, to triggers and body signs, rating emotions, problem sizes, problem solving, thoughts, flexibility, review, and graduation. And the adolescent material covers almost all the same material, but has some additional components. So it goes into more detail for mindfulness and has an entire distress tolerance session, and then spends more time on cognitive flexibility and radical acceptance. Additionally, the caregivers have some other topics that they learn about in their group, such as crisis management, functions of behavior, prevention strategies, reward systems, and then community resources and supports and future treatment planning. So this is kind of an overview of the components that are part of Regulating Together. So like I said, we have this caregiver training and didactic, we have real life practice. Most of the kids who come to see us are getting a little agitated when they're in group and a little annoyed with other group members. So it's like this perfect time to practice the skills in the moment. They also have some really nice social reinforcement and modeling, as well as peer pressure. So kids are a lot more willing to practice this skills in a session when other children are also practicing them. And you're just more likely to do it if everyone around you is doing it. There's peer interaction, reinforcement skills, visual supports, prompting and fading. And then the caregiver is really engaged as a coach throughout the intervention. Inclusion criteria includes that children and adolescents have to have functional communication. So this is really, we conceptualize it as verbal with the use of sentences. So if you're familiar with the ADOS, they would be eligible for a mod 3 or 4 on the ADOS. They have to be safe in a group setting, and that's not true for everyone. So if they've been very aggressive with other individuals at school, this is usually not the best treatment option for them because we have to keep everybody safe. Their IQ has to be 65 or above. So we do have kids with intellectual disability in the groups, but it doesn't go below 65. And then of course they have to have emotion dysregulation, right? So it's not a social skills intervention. They have to be reactive, irritable, easily frustrated, and need to work on that dysregulation piece. And I want to share a resource with you guys. So one of the ways that we identify emotion dysregulation for our research studies is through the Emotion Dysregulation Inventory, or the EDI. So this was created at the University of Pittsburgh. It's normed with inpatient and outpatient autism and the general population. So it has scores for kids who have autism and kids who do not have autism. One of the reasons why I like the scale so much is that it's a 7-day response period. So it's really looking at what has been happening in this past week, which is often easier for caregivers to rate than thinking back a month or 2 months at a time. It's also sensitive to change. So we do see change on this measure when kids are developing emotion regulation skills. It has 2 subscales, reactivity and dysphoria. And there's a short form and a long form, and the short form is super easy to complete. And the best part is that it's free. So it was developed through NIH, and that makes it so that it becomes freely available to the public. So I've included a link, and I'll share this with you afterwards, but this link, you just fill out a short form and the creator will send it to you. They just track who's using it to justify their creation of it and use. And there's also a young child version validated now for 5 to 7-year-olds. The version that we have is for children through adolescents and young adults. This is an example of the measure. So you can see there's on the first page, it has instructions for the caregiver. On the second page, they're just rating how much of a problem this behavior has been for the past 7 days, and really gets to the core of emotion dysregulation. So has explosive outbursts, cries or stays angry for 5 minutes or longer, intense emotional reactions, hard to calm down when upset. Emotions go from 0 to 100 instantly, which is a really common thing that we hear from parents. And those are just kind of those core symptoms of emotion dysregulation that caregivers talk about. So, and if you decide to use this measure, please feel free to reach out to me. We do have like an Excel scoring calculator that we usually share with people to make it really super easy to score. But the nice thing about this, that it's a short form and that it's every 7 days, you can very easily use this in treatment. So if you're working with someone who's struggling with emotion dysregulation, this is a great measure to track progress and change. So let's talk about some key strategies in regulating together. So what exactly is this intervention? So a big component is caregiver education and coaching. You know, the research really shows that in order for interventions to work in autism, we really do have to engage the caregivers in the process, because otherwise the skills aren't necessarily being used at home in the same way that we would want. And so we have to have the caregivers on our side and able to reinforce skills at home outside of sessions. So caregiver involvement is critical. We provide quite a bit of education. So what exactly is dysregulation? What does the cycle of dysregulation look like? When is the best time to intervene? So families will often say, oh, we tried deep breathing already. He'll never do it when he's upset. Well, we actually don't teach you to practice deep breathing when you're already upset. We learn how to do it when we're calm first, and then we're slowly able to incorporate it when we're more upset. We also teach them how to best use rewards at home to really increase skill use and openness to using the skills from group. We also teach caregivers how to coach before a triggering event, during a triggering event, and after it, so that they have all of the strategies that they need to be able to address any episodes. They learn how to coach all the skills that are taught to their children in group, so they're learning the same things their kids are learning. And caregivers are very much encouraged to manage their own dysregulation or stress. So it's not uncommon that they're also a little dysregulated, and they're usually highly stressed because their kids are having these emotional episodes on a regular basis. So caregivers practice relaxation every single session, just like the kids do. The sessions start with the caregivers doing their own deep breathing and their own muscle relaxation before the session progresses. They're also encouraged to create their own relaxation practices at home so that they're best able to support their kids and they're best able to stay calm in the moment when their children are struggling in some way. So this is one of the tools that we use to teach the caregivers. This is a level of emotions or an emotion dysregulation cycle that happens. And we talk about how, activating events happen. Kids might be a little agitated, and then they might be in this pre-crisis phase where they're potentially redirectable. But once they hit a 4 and a 5, they have lost rational control. This is not the time to have a conversation. It's not the time to talk about consequences. And it's also not a great time to be giving a lot of directions because they can't process it and they can't think through what you're telling them. And then once we get to this level 3, we're starting to calm down. Level 2, we're thinking very clearly again, and we're back to normal at a level 1. So it's important for caregivers to see this escalation, but also to know that it's not physically possible to stay at this escalated stage, even though it feels like it in the moment, that my kid is never going to calm down. They're never going to be able to handle this. We physically can't stay at that high level. And so we eventually come back down on the other side of that cycle, which can be a little reassuring. It still feels overwhelming, but to know that it has an endpoint is helpful. Another tool that we teach caregivers is prevention strategies. So things that you can do before a behavior ever happens to keep it from happening. So things like doing activities or skills in small doses or small steps so it doesn't get overwhelming. And so maybe we can't go to the grocery store and do our full-blown grocery trip together, but we might be able to go to the store and pick up 2 items and then get out of the store so that we don't get triggered and upset. Sometimes we truly have to avoid triggering situations. So sometimes it's just too much and it's not worth it to be overwhelmed. That's obviously not the end goal. The end goal is to be able to experience things in the world, but recognizing there might be times or places that we need to avoid something. Using visual or auditory reminders, things like picture schedules or visual timers is incredibly important. Changing how you ask or respond, so giving clear directions. Don't ask an individual to do something when it's not really an option whether you get to do it or not. The word no can be triggering in and of itself, so giving directions for what to do instead of what not to do. Responding to early signs of a problem, so those early cues that something is a little off, something's wrong, ending an activity before it gets out of control when you see those early signs is important. And then controlling the environment. If the iPad is not an option at a certain time, we should probably just put the iPad away, because if it sits out in front of you and you can't have it, you're going to get more and more agitated because you can't have it. So really removing triggers if we can in the environment. We also, like I mentioned, teach caregivers to stay calm. So it's important that they take care of themselves. Apps can be really helpful to create relaxation and mindfulness practices. And positive statements, things like, I'm a great caregiver, I'm doing my best, this will pass. We teach kids to do this. It's just as helpful for the grown-ups too. And therapy is always a good idea. So it's not super uncommon for us to suggest to caregivers that they might want to seek out their own therapy if it's truly overwhelming. So I'm going to shift gears to the skills that we teach the children and adolescents specifically. So one is breathing skills. We teach a figure 8 breathing and a triangle breathing. They're both fairly basic. There, you can just look them up on the internet. I'm going to show you one of them in action. We go very slowly and practice multiple times a day. We want to practice when the child is calm to build the skill. Once it's mastered, it can be used to help them calm down in the moment, but we really have to build some muscle memory. So this is the triangle breathing. I would love it if you guys could do it with me. So there's a hand on the screen. We're just going to follow the screen. You can trace it in front of you, on your leg, on your arm. whatever you want. So we're going to breathe in, hold, and breathe out. So we like this one because there is an active component to it, right? It's really hard for kids and teens with autism to just sit and do deep breathing, but when there's something physical or active involved, it becomes a lot easier for them to do it. We also teach quite a bit of muscle relaxation. So when our muscles are relaxed, our brain and breathing follows. These are great tools to use when a child is anxious or irritated. But again, we must first spend time teaching them the skills when they're calm already. They should be practiced multiple times a day so that they can get really good at it. So the first one is chew some gum. So pretend with me that you have a piece of gum in your mouth and chew it. So this one is good for your jaw and facial muscles. A lot of us tense our jaws or our teeth when we're feeling stressed. So this is a nice one for that. They don't actually chew real gum. It's real gum. It's all pretend. The second one is hide in your shell. So pretend like you're a turtle with me and you're going to lift your shoulders up and hide in your turtle shell and then shake it out. And we tell them we always want to pay attention to how it feels when we shake it out at the end. That's the time when our muscles are calm and relaxed. Stretch like a rubber band is just a simple one. Everybody take a nice big stretch. I did this one at a Fragile X conference recently with self-advocates. It was mostly all adult self-advocates, and they applauded and cheered for stretching like a rubber band every time we did it, and it was fantastic. And then the last one is squeeze some orange juice. So you're just going to make a fist and squeeze tight, 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 and release. And squeeze tight, 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 and release. So again, we pay attention to how it feels when we release. So this is just some of the samples that we use for muscle relaxation. We have cute pictures and color bubbles for all of them. And we try to, each part of progressive muscle relaxation, if you're familiar with that, where you're doing relaxation from your head down to your toes, each of those parts are represented in our small skills. So we teach them in teeny tiny steps. And then eventually, if you have someone who's a bit more advanced in their relaxation practice, they can combine them into full-blown progressive muscle relaxation. We also use a 5-point scale. So rating and recognizing emotions is incredibly important. And this is really, we want a tool for communication of how we're feeling. That's the goal of this. And it helps individuals to start to recognize the signs early and address them earlier in the process. So we use a 5-point scale, as I said. Other things are just as effective with this. So things like an emotion thermometer, zones of regulation does a really nice color progression. Any of these can work. And then we really encourage caregivers to make this part of the culture and language of their home. So not just rating the high emotions, but also rating the low ones so that kids are able to recognize when they're at a 1, a 2, or a 3. So sometimes it's really easy to know you're at a 5, but anything below that is a lot harder. And these middle numbers are the most difficult to identify, but they're the most important. So we teach kids that the time when you need to do your relaxation is at a 3 and lower. So if you've already gotten to a 4 or a 5, it's too late to calm your body and your brain. And we almost just need to wait it out and get to the other side of it. But if we're going to use some of our relaxation strategies, a 3 is the best point to do that. We also encourage families to really rate themselves. So not just having the caregivers rate the child, but oh gosh, somebody just cut me off in traffic. I am a 4 right now. I'm so annoyed. Or gosh, I love that the fireplace is on and I have my cozy blanket. I'm definitely feeling a 1 right now. So making sure that they are rating themselves, they're rating their children or adults in their family, and using the skill across everyone. Another skill that we teach is increasing cognitive flexibility, and this is probably particular to autism specifically, but relates to a lot of other disorders as well. So we teach flexibility games. So this is like thinking outside the box. So we'll say an item like a sponge, and they have 1 minute to tell us all the ways you can use a sponge without cleaning, not cleaning. So you can't say the thing that its actual purpose is. We use a brick, we do a brick, and we say you can't say building a house, but all the other ways you can use it. And we'll go through 3 different items in a row and see if they can increase their score each time. It's always very interesting to me. So the caregivers play this too. And when the caregivers are incredibly inflexible and they have a hard time thinking outside of the box too, that's always like a very interesting treatment observation. We also teach a flexibility scale, so helping kids to differentiate situations where they're super flexible, they're like a little inflexible, and then they're just like really, really inflexible and stuck. And, working hard to be flexible in those middle times where it's hard, but I can do it versus those really tricky times. That's not where we're going to start working on flexibility. We teach 2 skills for building flexibility. One is a plan B, a backup plan, or a bonus plan. We like to call it a bonus plan because oftentimes it ends up being a good thing. It doesn't feel like it's a good thing in the moment, but many times it can turn out to be even better than what the original plan was. And we talk to families a lot about how when kids are younger, families are experts at backup plans. Like whenever, like if they're planning, like we're at the holidays, you're planning to go to a party at, grandparents' house. You're probably going to have multiple things that you can do if your child has a hard time. Like I'm going to bring snacks because I don't know if they're going to like the food. We're going to take 2 cars because we're not sure if he's going to be able to stay the whole time. I'm bringing his iPad because he might not want to do what everyone else is doing. So parents create all of these backup plans. What we find is they don't always start to include their child or adolescent in those backup plans. And so the kids and teens are not learning that skill. They're not developing it for themselves to think through what do I need to do in this situation. So we really encourage caregivers to start to include the child or teen in that process and have them help come up with backup plans before and when things go awry and don't work out. We also teach compromise. So sometimes you don't get everything that you want. You only get a little bit of what you want. And that way everybody gets a little bit of what they want. And then we do a lot of practice with this. So kids and caregivers are encouraged to start being flexible in small ways. So things like sitting in a different spot at the dinner table or brushing your teeth in the kitchen instead of the bathroom. And everyone coming up with really small ways to be flexible and practice. Okay. I'm just going to briefly share about our current studies and some research background, just so we have enough time to take some questions at the end too. So these are our current studies. I'm sharing them because I would love for you to send families our way. So the first one is the DoD randomized controlled trial. This is funded by the Department of Defense, and kids receive either Regulating Together or AIMS, which is an academic success program. It has a diversity, equity, and inclusion focus. We have some additional supports built in. So things like childcare for siblings, mileage reimbursement, and we do qualitative interviews with diverse families. The goal of this is to show that Regulating Together works at addressing emotion dysregulation and hopefully be prepared for future implementation in more community settings in the future. And we will be recruiting for this study through next winter. So 8 to 12-year-olds for this study. And this is the flyer. If anyone's interested in getting any flyers to pass on to families, let me know and I'm happy to share them. And families get free intervention and they get paid up to $240 for attending the research visits. The second one is the canine assisted version. So this is a multi-site trial with Nationwide Children's in Columbus. It's focused on the additive effects of having a canine assisted therapy. So therapy dogs are in the room throughout the entire group, and we're applying all of the material to the dog as well as the child in the moment. We do a lot of heart rate variability assessment with the child when a dog is present. My little soapbox for this is that everyone believes that therapy dogs are so amazing for kids with autism. We actually don't have any data to support that yet. And so it's really important that we do the research and see how kids with autism actually respond to therapy dogs. We have these small moments in every session called puppy pauses where the kids interact 2-to-1 with the dog and they practice relaxation. It's very fun and it is recruiting through the winter of 2026. And this is the flyer. We use that first flyer across both studies for 8 to 12-year-olds, but this one goes up to age 15, so 8 to 15-year-olds. And then I also want to share with you guys the website really fast. Let me see if it's going to come up. Just a second. So all of the research studies that are recruiting currently are on the website. It's also just a nice resource to share with families of individuals who are having a tough time with emotion dysregulation. So it has an overview of the intervention, all of the information about it. And then there's this section for families. So this has a lot of resources. So there's some webinars that teach some of those relaxation strategies that I talked about directly to families through the webinar. There's a podcast that I did about the intervention, some of our research findings in autism specifically through a webinar, and then some that are more Fragile X specific. All of our research studies and their flyers are listed here. So if you have a family that's interested, this is a great place to send them. And they all have QR codes, so you can scan them to express interest in the study. And then we have a list of providers. So if you have an individual, if you know someone who's outside of the Cincinnati area, there are providers across the country who are trained in regulating together now. And so they're listed by state. And there's also these really fun quotes from all of our participants on like every page, and they change and update. So some nice feedback. All right, I am just going to show you a couple of slides about research, and then we'll do questions for the last 10 minutes. And the website is just regulatingtogether.com. Okay, so the study that we did here at Cincinnati Children's for our pilot data was an interesting study setup because we had a 5-week control period for each kid, and that really was their control period individually. And then 5 weeks of treatment, and we followed them immediately post, 5 weeks post, and 10 weeks post with lots of outcome measures. And so this is an overview of the results. So we had 60 kids enrolled, 9 of them withdrew. Most of the screen failures were due to language being too impaired and aggression being too high. Improvement-wise, we saw some nice, this measure looks at knowledge around emotion regulation strategies, and kids improved in their knowledge. We also saw reactivity changes on the EDI. This is a global rating scale that we saw changes, and then flexibility improved. The biggest outcome, though, was that we saw a decrease in hospitalization rate from 25% to 8% post-intervention. And we looked at those kids for a year before the group began and a year after the group ended. And the biggest thing to look at on here is that the green is good. So all shades of green are very good. So if we look at this baseline period, there wasn't very much green, right? Most of these kids stayed the same or they got a little bit worse. And then post-treatment, we see that they've gotten better and we really see a durability of this. So this is the 10-week post-intervention that kids are not only staying better, they're continuing to get better. So we have more kids who are much improved, which we really believe is the caregiver component. This is also our outcomes for our 8 to 12-year-olds. This red line right here, this is the EDI. That is the clinically significant cutoff point. So once you're below this line, you're no longer considered to have emotion dysregulation per that measure. And so you can see that kids didn't improve during the baseline period. They improved a little bit post-treatment, but the real change was at this 5-week and 10-week time period after intervention. We also saw changes in dysphoria, that lack of positive emotions, and improvements in flexibility and emotion regulation skills knowledge. When COVID hit, we were in the midst of this pilot trial and we had to very quickly pivot to a virtual version. And what we found is that our teens actually did quite a bit better virtually than they did in person, which was super interesting. But again, this is that clinical significant range right here. So the teens were very much out of that clinical significant range for reactivity. Same thing for dysphoria. They had improvements in flexibility as well as emotion regulation on the brief. We also collect a lot of physiological data. So we look at heart rate variability and attach these little heart rate monitors to the kids. And I think this is just like a beautiful example of what deep breathing really is. So the kids have this baseline period, then they have a relaxation period. And then this is when this child is doing deep breathing, and this is before intervention. So the goal really is to create these nice, smooth hills. It's well regulated, it's very calm and goes clearly up and down in a stable way. And then this is the same child at the 10-week follow-up, and we can see that this has regulated even better. So we see that their deep breathing has calmed down and they're really doing it well. So when you are teaching deep breathing to a child and you question yourself, does this even work? It does. Physiologically, we can see it, and it's really helpful. And then I just wanted to share just a little bit. We did some qualitative interviews with the participants that came through. We had 5 diverse caregivers that participated in the interviews. We also had several participate who their kids were a little bit lower cognitively. And the themes were that it was really helpful to the caregivers. They liked it overall. They felt like their family and cultural factors were addressed. The format and strategies were helpful, but they struggled a lot with feasibility and they needed just a little bit more information and support. So things like, what do you do with siblings after school? With siblings during the intervention, kids are hungry, traffic is hard, parking is hard, gas is hard, and then needing a little bit more one-on-one attention. And we really address this in the DoD trial. So families get mileage reimbursement for the therapy appointments. We provide childcare for siblings. We feed the caregivers and the kids just snacks, but they're freely available. And then we have an individualized consult at the very end of treatment that is one-on-one with the kid and the parent together. So here's some additional resources. These are both on the website, so that's the easiest place to access them. And here's my contact information. And that's it. So I would love to answer any questions that you might have. And we have 9 minutes, so.
That's amazing.
Kind of sped through a little bit. So if there's anything that wasn't clear, please let me know and I'm happy to address it.
There's one question in the chat, and I think it was from Christy, but I think she had to hop off. And I had a question that kind of maybe goes with this. This had to do with the teaching the muscle relaxation. Do you have any already developed scripts or social story like language that could be paired with the breathing and stretching activities? And my question was, how would you teach? Like, can you just say what you say when you teach that muscle relaxation and those like incremental steps.
Yeah. So it's kind of like how I did it in the presentation. So we just start off with just practicing everyone together in the group setting. Um, the video that I referenced, that had teaching the webinar that's available on the website, it actually teaches a lot of the skills in it. So that's a great place to start because it tells caregivers how to teach it directly to their own kids. But we really start off with just trying to bring as much body awareness that we can. So if we're squeezing oranges, we are like overdoing squeezing the oranges. So making a big deal about we're squeezing tight, 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 and then we're going to let go and shake it. And so we're doing it 3 or 4 times in a row. So they really feel it. And then pointing out to them, do you notice how your hand feels when you let go? That's when your hands are relaxed. And then we do that with each body part. So helping them to recognize like what's happening with their body in the moment is really important.
And then I had another question.
Go ahead.
Do you have any recommendations of interventions for children or adolescents, young adults who have very limited language or no verbal language? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, so we're actually like really interested in adapting down to that population. So it's kind of the next focus of our group in terms of like where we take the research. So it is near and dear to my heart. We do it mostly in individual therapy now. So there are clinicians in our social work neurobehavioral team that know the curriculum really well and they're able to implement it in an individual therapy setting a lot easier. We also do it with like Fragile X syndrome and other syndromic causes of autism and genetic disorders. And I can tell you anecdotally, it works really, really well. It just takes a little longer to teach. So it takes more sessions, more individualized attention. We simplify the material quite a bit. So we're only going to teach one breathing skill probably, or we're going to try 2 and pick the one that's easiest and stick with that instead of giving all the options. Same thing with muscle relaxation. We'll probably only pick like 1 or 2 muscle relaxation to start with. And our 5-point scale, we usually do more of like a 3-point system. We teach size of the problem as part of the curriculum, and it's goes from like small, medium, and large in our 8 to 12-year-old groups, and the adolescents are like tiny, small, medium, large, huge. For our intellectually disabled population or low language population, we would just do something very simple like a big deal and not a big deal. So 2 choices to pick from. And then really emphasizing that caregiver component a lot because they are going to have to practice at home very frequently. And one of the things that we use, and we're going to put this on the website at some point, it just hasn't gotten added yet, is a reward plan that's specific for skill practice. So when we create reward plans in group, it's not like just a general, we're going to work on behavior or we're going to work on this problem behavior. It is specifically, we're going to reward you for practicing relaxation 3 times a day and reward you each time you tell us where you're at on the 5-point scale.
Great.
I was just curious, what does the treatment space look like? Is it like clinical or does it look like a classroom?
Have you ever been to the partial hospitalization space at Cincinnati Children's? Because that's where it's at. So it's we're at Norwood, but we've done it at the Green Township and at the main campus, and we did it at College Hill for a little bit too. So it does kind of look like a classroom. It's a very large treatment room at Norwood that has like multiple tables in the room. There's some cabinets on the wall. So when we're running the group, we have kids and adolescents sit in like a half circle around a whiteboard, and we're doing learning. We call it group. We do our group there, and then we go back to a table to do activity. and that's reinforcing the group learning. And then the kids have a break time, which they get a snack and just a little bit of downtime. And then they have free time at the very end. And that's like board games and not Legos because they're horrible to clean, but like Magna tiles and other building type toys. And we set those up for the kids. So it's it's just like a couple of tables and chairs, and the whiteboard is really important because we do write everything up on the board so that they can visually see it. All of our visuals are kept on the board, so they see the 5-point scale. They see, so anytime a kid is struggling, we can immediately reference it and immediately pull it out and say, "Oh, we're going to do some triangle breathing right now." Or, "I think you might be a 3. Could we do something to calm down?" Any other questions? Megan?
Hi there. I was on the website and was looking at resources that you provided and to see if it was there, but it's not, and that's okay. But when you were talking about the caregivers and the ways that they can self-regulate, and then the last line was therapy is also helpful. I was wondering if you have any resources for helping parents find a therapist who understands sort of this wing of parenting, because it's very different than regular parenting. And so I mean, I'm in Cincinnati, so I know I'm thinking locally, but is that something that you guys have?
I wish we did, and we don't. It's definitely like something that we think a lot about and we hope to like pull together. It's just like so niche, right? Like there's not a ton of people that truly understand that experience and what it's like for their kids and their family as a whole. And so, I don't have great recommendations for that. And honestly, insurance is such a barrier for a lot of families that they almost need to find who's available in their insurance network and then
Right.
see if they work with parents at all.
Right.
But yes, I wish that we had that.
Megan,
Thank-
I might be able to give you a couple of resources
That'd be
of
great.
people that might be, it might be the middleman to the therapist that might have a niche in this. But we did do a couple of trainings earlier in the fall on Todd Hayden. He's a professor at UC. He did a great training on basically taking care of me so I can take care of you.
Yeah.
And so that is on our website, and I think it is.
Okay, is that on the RAAC website or on the?
Yes,
Okay.
on the RAAC website. So I'm going to email everybody after this training with this recorded session, but maybe I might just email everybody who is registered for any of these trainings and include all of the recorded sessions, all of the PowerPoints, all of the things. That way everybody has it, and then everything will be, if it's not already on our website, will be on our website as well.
That would
So
be
yeah, so that'll be great.
Thank you.
We are at 4:30 right now, but I do want to offer just a minute or two if anyone else has a question or comment.
And I'm going to put my email address in the chat really fast, just in case you have any additional questions, or if you have any kids or teens that you think would be a good fit for the research studies. It's a great way to get free intervention. So please feel free to send them our way.
And I'm also going to I just threw in a survey. You guys can just offer a little feedback. This has been kind of a trial run, a kind of a pilot this fall on bringing back the RAAC training series, which I've loved. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We've had awesome presenters and have learned so much, and I hope you all have too. So definitely want to keep things going into the new year and would love your feedback. And then I'm also I finally figured out, I know, like this is so me, but I finally figured out how to get approval from DODD for CPDs. So I got approval for this one. And then I do have a certificate of completion that I'm going to throw in the chat as well. so both the approval and the certificate. And then, so now I know how to do it. But if you are a teacher or it may be similar licensures, I believe, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. You can just take the certificate of completion and submit that. But let me know if you need any additional documentation, because I'm a work in progress. So let me just throw those two things in here.
Can I ask one last question just about
Mhm.
the timing? When did these classes become available?
Like what time of day?
Like what year?
Oh, what year did we start doing it? It must have been 20, let's see, I started here in 2013, so 2015 probably, 2014 or 2015.
Yeah, no, that's helpful because I have 3 kids. 2 of my older 2 were late
Mhm.
on the spectrum in high school, and emotion regulation was always the toughest thing.
Mhm.
And we did all the things at Children's, like through the ADHD center and stuff. And I
Mhm.
was like, I had never heard of this before.
Yeah, why didn't we get that?
Yeah, but I have to say, like, I'm so glad that you're doing this because we could have completely used something like this. Like, it would have been, the earlier the better, would have been
Yeah,
lovely, but it's still helpful now.
thank you. Yeah, it's definitely an area of need, and we have lots of kids that definitely need it. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a great evening, and I will be in touch. Thanks so much again, Rebecca.
You're welcome. Bye.